Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for all of you. Our participants today are going to be on mute. But we absolutely want to address your questions should you happen to have any. So please make use of the question portion of the dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is, will the presentation be available afterwards, after we're finished? And the answer to that is yes. Both the slides and the recorded presentation itself will both be made available through our website, pjr.com, under previously recorded webinars. Our presentation for today is going to cover the following topics. We're going to discuss why this is done through a two-stage process, why the two-stage process is what we do. And we're going to kind of walk you through all of the steps that are completed. We're going to cover the quotation phase. We'll talk a little bit about what goes on prior to the stage 1. We will cover the stage 1 process front to back, so to speak, and kind of cover the flow. And I'm going to highlight for you some things that can prevent continuance to stage 2. Particularly in ISO 9001, there's not a lot of things that can derail your progress to stage 2, but there are a few, and I want to make sure that you're aware of what those are. I'll have a couple of concluding remarks, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. Now, in terms of why a two-stage process, I suppose the easy answer is because we are required to do a two-stage process. PJR is held accountable to a number of requirements as an accredited certification body. And probably the most important of these is the ISO 17021 series of standards. Now, the 17021-1 standard has a clause within it that reads as follows. The initial certification audit of a management system shall be conducted in 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2. Now, in terms of the intent behind this and the logic behind this, essentially, the framers of the standard, the people that write the requirements, they want to make sure that only those companies that are truly ready for the certification assessment get to go through the full audit. In other words, they want to make sure that it's an efficient use of auditor resources. So any client that is going to go through a stage 1 audit, obviously that process begins with becoming a contracted client. And we use a series of scope-specific applications. We call these the F1 series of documents. And they're intended to help facilitate the quote process, and long-term, they're intended to help make sure the audit process goes smoothly as well. Now, if you've ever reviewed a PJR F1, they tend to be very dense. They tend to be lengthy documents. The shortest of these, I believe, is about 1.5 pages, and we've got a couple of them that run to 3 pages. Now, we ask for all of this information for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to make sure that our quotation is competitive. If we have all of the relevant details, we can potentially quote you more aggressively in terms of the amount of audit time that you will need to go through. So the more information you can give us, the better. Now, speaking of audit time, you may or may not be aware, There is a standardized grid that PJR has to abide by in terms of assigning the audit time. And that grid is issued by the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF, through their mandatory document number 5. MD5 establishes a lot of key things in terms of audit time. It tells you the minimum audit times for an organization, and that's done primarily by the head count of the organization. And it also presents a number of requirements to apply in terms of either adding or taking time away. Now, one fact about reducing audit time is that we are only permitted to reduce the audit time up to a maximum of 30%. Now, MD5, if you are so inclined, it is a public domain document. If you go to the IAF website at www.iaf.nu, you are free to download a copy of MD5. You can also just simply Google IAF MD5 and download it for your review. So we always caution you that, if you have a competitor that's giving you a quote that's dramatically different from what PJR is giving you, be careful, only because it's possible that that registrar is not abiding by the accreditation body requirements. So once we have you under contract, a couple of things happen. You will be assigned to what we refer to as an audit program coordinator. You will no doubt refer to them as your scheduler. And that scheduler is intended to take care of you throughout the process. They're intended to be your primary point of contact, not just on when is the audit going to take place, but for a variety of other questions. Now, part of what the scheduler has to do when they actually schedule your audit is they need to make sure that the auditor that is assigned to you is qualified to do the audit and has experience in your technical area. So let's say, just for the sake of discussion, that you are an organization that manufactures tires. So this is a rubber product. The auditor that we send has to be somebody that is qualified in rubber products. Now, obviously, we want to pick someone that is close by. We want to try to save on travel costs as well. But we have to make sure that the auditor that goes into your facility is going to have some background and some capability of knowing what they're looking at when they review your processes. Now, once while these arrangements are being made, the scheduler is going to ask you to complete what we call the F108 series of documents, specific to your scope. And you can think of this as an attestation of readiness. In other words, you're saying that, yes, we are ready for our stage 1 audit. We have all the things that we need. So let's take a look at what's discussed on the F108. Okay. Now, the F108 documents, they vary a little bit from scope to scope. Obviously, our F108 for IETF is going to differ a bit from the F108 for ISO 9001 and so forth. But there are a couple of things that are fairly universal. So the F108 asks, among other things, do you have a scope for your system? Have you considered any exclusions or exemptions? Have you determined what your processes are and how they interact with each other? Do you have your process measurables or key performance indicators and the associated performance data? That one's key, and we're actually going to be revisiting that in just a few minutes here. Have you conducted your internal audit? Have you determined internal auditor competency requirements? Have you had a management review? Do you have things in place for controlling outsourced processes? Have you determined statutory regulatory requirements? Do you have all required documentation? That one varies quite a bit from scope to scope. And have you completed the PGR Form F-191? We're actually going to be digging to that on the next slide here. So a long list of things. And again, all of these things need to be fairly complete in order for the Stage 1 audit to be a success. So let's talk a little more about this PGR F-191. This is a document that we've had for a long time. It goes back over all of the years that we've been doing process-based audits. And it's intended to help you ensure that the processes you've established for your system represent a fulfillment of all the clauses of the applicable standard. The idea is that you're going to use this F-191 to document what your processes are. Hopefully these are going to be the same processes shown on your interaction of processes document, and assign the clause numbers accordingly. So let's walk our way through an example of what this would look like. So here's the interaction of processes. Let's say that this is the IOP that's been created by the organization that's going to be doing their audit. Now you'll note in the lower left-hand corner, we have 6 named processes, right? So here's our 6 processes: sales order entry, purchasing, production, shipping, quality, and support. Now, if this was for your company and you were given the F-191, those would be the 6 processes that would go on the F-191. So let's see how that might look. Okay, so on the left-hand side here, we have our 6 named processes. And then, as you can see, we have all of the clauses represented by at least one of these processes. Now, the majority of them are captured in this support box, and that's fine. You'll note that clause 8.3 has no assigned processes. We take that to mean that this organization is not design responsible, and that's also fine. But the key here is that this organization knows what their processes are and knows how they interface and meet the requirements of ISO 9001. So this tells us that the organization has done some work and implemented a system that reflects who they are and also meets the requirements of the standard. Okay, so now it's audit day and time to go through the audit process. Most Stage 1 audits are going to be done on site. We do permit off-site Stage 1s for simple ISO 9001 systems. A couple of other scopes, these are permitted. There is a savings in travel costs. However, in most cases, you're looking at a larger amount of overall audit time. Now, before the auditor arrives, before the Stage 1 audit takes place, you should expect to hear from your audit either by phone or email or perhaps both, at least a few days in advance of the Stage 1, whether it's being done on site or not. And you should expect to receive an audit plan. We do ask that when you receive the audit plan that you confirm that all information on the audit plan is correct and let your auditor know if it's not. The Stage 1 audit, like any other audit, is supposed to begin with an opening meeting. This is a great chance for you to confirm any last-minute changes, to make sure that your auditor is aware of visitors that you're going to have, personnel availability issues, and so forth. From the opening meeting, the Stage 1 audit will proceed in accordance with the auditor's audit plan. And the auditor will use the PJR Stage 1 workbook to record the results of their assessment. Now, everything that we look at in the Stage 1 audit is documentation based in nature. We look at internal audits, we look at management review, key performance indicators, your scope, and so forth. And everything that is looked at is given one of 2 conclusions. Either the item is judged conforms or concern. Now, concern refers to anything that represents a disconnect between your implemented process and the related requirements from the applicable standard. We're going to dig into a few of these in just a minute here. Now, once the auditor has completed their review, typically they're going to need a little bit of time to prepare their audit report. There are no nonconformances in a stage 1 audit. I always like to tell people that the stage 1 audit is unique in that we're going to point out to you the things that are out of sorts, the things that need to be fixed, but most importantly, it's your one chance to fix these sorts of things without having to issue official corrective action. It's kind of your, think of it as the one and only time you're going to have a warning shot on some of these items. So no official nonconformances. Following the report prep, the closing meeting will be conducted to discuss the results. Now, the stage 1 audit has 3 potential outcomes. We are going to either recommend for continuance to stage 2 with no concerns. We might recommend continuance to stage 2 with, you could probably say, minor concerns, or in cases where there are significant concerns, the recommendation will be for a repeating of the stage 1 audit. Now, you'll be asked to sign an acknowledgement of the stage 1 results, and you will be given a copy of the completed audit report. Now, depending on travel circumstances and so forth, it may be a few additional days before you get the official report, but certainly not more than that. Now, in terms of things that can prevent continuance to a stage 2 audit, things that might lead the auditor to conclude that the stage 1 needs to be repeated. If you have an inadequate or inappropriate interaction of processes. So what do we mean by that? If you have something that represents the PDCA diagram from the standard, if you have a canned interaction of processes from a consultant, if you have anything as your interaction of processes that doesn't reflect who you are, if it shows processes that do not align with the processes that the auditor is seeing on site, that's a significant concern. It means that the organization does not fully grasp the concept of processes, and it has not analyzed its system to identify what its processes are. And that's a fundamental step in the establishment of a quality management system. We look at the IOP as the single best indicator of your understanding of the process approach. Another big issue that can come up is a lack of process measures or a lack of process performance data. Now, if you read ISO 9001, it requires that you monitor, measure, and analyze your processes. So the approach that we take is every process on your interaction of processes document should be monitored or measured, and there should be performance data available to prove that you're doing this monitoring or measurement. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a unique measure for each process. And a lot of organizations choose to have kind of a lean number of process effectiveness measures that cover multiple processes. That is totally fine. Bear in mind that there are, for a couple of standards, minimum requirements on the amount of data that has to be available. Other standards have mandatory metrics. ITF, for example, requires some very specific things in the area of measuring your maintenance process. Long story short, you have to have your process measures not only determined, but you have to be monitoring them. You have to have real-time data you have to have performance data for your process measures. This is probably the #1 item, at least in ISO 9001, that prevents continuance to the stage 2 audit. This more than anything else. Couple of other items. If you have not conducted an internal audit, that's going to potentially prevent continuance to stage 2. So, when we look at the internal audit process, we're looking for a number of things. Are your internal audits planned? There's a lot of ways that can be done. Do you have evidence to show that your processes were audited? Again, a lot of ways that can be done too. Did you document nonconformances? Did you take corrective action for your internal audit nonconformances? Did you make sure that there was objectivity in the audit process? In other words, did you select internal auditors who were independent of what they were auditing, that they didn't audit their own work? Now, if the internal audit is not complete, but you can show evidence that it has been planned, in most circumstances, we can still recommend continuance to the stage 2, but you lose the benefit of having a review of the internal audit during the stage 1 audit. Remember, I told you that the stage 1 audit is your one free shot. In other words, if we look at the internal audit in stage 1 and we point out some things that are concerning, you have the opportunity to fix those things before stage 2 and avoid a nonconformance. And if we issue a nonconformance at stage 2, now you have to issue corrective action. So again, yes, you can show that your internal audit is planned and incomplete at stage 1, but you're giving up a really valuable opportunity to have that information reviewed prior to stage 2. Now, in terms of internal audit or competency records, that is another item that can potentially prevent continuance to stage 2. Internal audit or competency, you need to remember, is very much like any other competency within your company, in that it's up to you to determine what it means to be competent for a task. So whatever that means to your organization, you just need to make sure that you've made that determination and that the internal auditors have in fact been deemed competent in accordance with your established requirements. Now, bear in mind there are certain standards and industries where there are additional provisions that are applicable. IATF, for example, has fairly aggressive requirements as pertains to internal audit or competency. Now, the attitude for management review is very similar to what we have for internal audit, and that is that the management review process does not necessarily have to be complete at the point of the stage 1 audit. If you can show that it's planned, we would still recommend continuance to stage 2. But again, you lose the benefit of kind of a free look, so to speak, at the management review process, whereby you might identify some things that you would take care of prior to stage 2. Now, in terms of what we look for in the management review, fairly straightforward. We want to make sure that all of the required inputs and outputs are addressed. One little point that we like to share, a lot of our clients like to use PowerPoint presentations to capture their management review process. That's fine. Bear in mind that often, though, those PowerPoint presentations are going to capture the agenda really well, but they may not capture the discussion so well. They may not capture the outputs, the things that were decided, the conclusions that were drawn, the actions to be taken, and so forth. Now, all conclusions in a stage 1 assessment are subject to executive committee concurrence. So even if I do a stage 1 audit as program manager, even my decisions are subject to executive committee review to make sure that the decisions reached are appropriate and fair. And any audit that's done by PJR, the client, the auditee, is afforded the right to issue a dispute or appeal of the auditor's decision. So let's say the auditor decides you're not ready for stage 2 and issues a recommendation to repeat stage 1. You can dispute that using our Pro 10 process, which the Pro 10 procedure can be downloaded direct from our website. Now, if the recommendation that is reached is to repeat the stage 1, as I mentioned earlier, you will get the stage 1 report. We ask that you work from that report to shore up the issues and make sure that you're on the right path to a better result at the next stage 1 assessment. If the recommendation is that you continue on to stage 2, we ask that you try to have at least a 30-day gap between stage 1 and 2, and preferably 60 to 75-day gap. Bear in mind, we do have a 21-day cancellation policy for travel costs, and you need to bear in mind that if the audits are back-to-back and the stage 1 result is fail, now we're looking at cancellation of the stage 2 at your expense. And that's almost always a recipe for trouble. We ask you to use that time between stage 1 and 2, again, to address anything that's been raised as a point of concern within your stage 1 report. Those items, in almost all cases, are going to likely result in nonconformances during the stage 2 audit if left unresolved. So in conclusion, we want our clients to feel confident and comfortable with the stage 1 audit. We want this to be a good experience for you. It's our hope that the care that's taken in the pre-stage 1 phase and the mutual support of both your auditor and the executive committee will help make that process seamless for you. And we do wish you every success in your certification journey. I'd like to invite you to tune in to one of our other webinars. We have a webinar called ISO 9001 2015, Anticipating Auditor Expectations in Key Areas. This one is shown on a semi-annual basis. It explores fundamental issues inherent to ISO 9001 2015 and identifies which of these have been around the longest. And it's intended to kind of clear the air on what we are looking for with some of these real fundamental requirements. I also have a presentation on the interaction of processes itself. That topic is sufficiently important that it gets its own webinar. How to understand what processes are and how to map them out correctly. We have webinars on a lot of other things too. We have webinars on 13485, ITF, ISO 14000, and so forth. If you check out our website, you'll see a whole list of webinar offerings. If you'd like to be kept informed on the latest news, the best way to do that is to opt in. If you visit our website, excuse me, at pjr.com, go to the bottom of the page, input your email address, and click subscribe. You'll be automatically entered for the latest news updates, including new webinars, changes to the standards, and other helpful information. I do thank you for your time, and again invite you to visit our website. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard and see what we have here. Okay, we have a question from Roger Derrickson asking if quality managers show proficiency with the standard and the company quality management system, do you still require or recommend they have certified training? And Roger, I'm going to assume that you're referring to for performing an internal audit. Again, the expectation is that the organization, you in this case, determine what it means to be competent to perform an internal audit, set your own agenda, so to speak, and fulfill that agenda. If that means that you have demonstrated proficiency with the standard, well then that's completely fine. We would test that, so to speak, by looking at the effectiveness of the internal audits themselves. That's typically how we would make our assessment. Are there any other questions I can answer today? Okay, well, wishing you all a good day and thank you for your time.